Welcome, everybody, to our first edition of our Wing Spotlight interviews. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce Ann Robertson-Tait, who is the president of GeothermEX, which is a company that was acquired by SLB back in 2010. And I've got a lot of exciting questions to ask you today, Ann, and I want to jump right into them because we have a lot to discuss. So
Great.
first, I am super interested in your background. You have been in geothermal for a very long time. Your name is known by many. Whenever I talk to any female in geothermal, everyone mentions your name, if you didn't know that. So I'm super eager to learn about your background, how you got into geothermal, and then I saw that you're a Fulbright scholar, so I am very interested to hear how you got that, what you did with it, and yeah, let's start with that.
All right. Why not? So I was doing an undergraduate degree in geology in South Florida at Florida Atlantic University. And I was wondering sort of where I was going to go. And I looked at what my colleagues who had graduated as undergrads were doing, and they were doing mostly oil and gas. Not a big surprise. But they were doing uh, some things that I didn't really want to do. I mean, we were doing well log analysis in the old-fashioned way when we moved bits of paper around. If you're old enough to remember that time, probably not. And sedimentary petrology. And I just thought, oh, that doesn't sound very interesting. But I had been working for the South Florida Water Management District as an intern. So I was into water use. And then I went to the library thinking about where I would take my career, and I found a book on geothermal energy. And that was like it. It was the moment that basically in 1982, sorry, I'm ancient, but that was when I realized what I wanted to do. I thought, water, okay, this is hot water, but water nonetheless. It's something that resonates with me, and basically that decision sort of changed my life altogether. And so the Fulbright scholarship was something that came up after I was looking around at grad schools where I could do geothermal energy. And there weren't that many places. I mean, Stanford had already started a program mostly related to reservoir engineering, and I'm a geologist. UC Berkeley had a little bit. Brown University in Rhode Island, they were doing power plant stuff at that time, but there really wasn't much for a geoscientist. And then, I thought about it and I looked around at the schools that were available specific to geothermal, and there was one in Japan, Iceland, Italy, and New Zealand. And I thought, well, the New Zealanders speak a kind of English, and I'll go for that because I didn't really know the languages of these other countries. And and then I learned about the Fulbright program from a professor at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And I'll tell you, it was a really good move because I was looking at scholarships in the United States that 10,000 people were competing for. And in the Fulbright Scholar for geothermal, there was a series of geothermal scholars that went to New Zealand from the United States. And basically, there was very little competition. They had usually one Fulbright scholar per year, and there were maybe a half a dozen people or less applying for them. So the odds were really good. And I was thrilled to get it. And it was really important. I had no money at the time. They paid for my tuition and my room and board. And it just worked out really well. And I'll just add a little personal flair.
Yeah.
I met my husband there, and we
Oh,
married after I returned to the United States after the Fulbright scholarship. So,
wow.
we continue to have a pretty good marriage after a long time. So,
Oh, that's
a good
wonderful.
bonus
Everything kind
there.
of yeah, fell into place. Well, that's great. So what did you do then? What was your Fulbright scholarship? What was the
So
research that you
my
did?
my topic was related to, well, of course, New Zealand, had the first ever large scale power plant that's at Wairake in the central in the center of the North Island of New Zealand, which is very volcanic. And I was looking around and talking to various people at the University of Auckland about what my topic might be. And I learned about some ground subsidence that was happening in Wairaka because they had not thought about injection at that time. They were concerned that reinjection of cooler fluids would reduce the enthalpy of the reservoir as a whole, not really knowing at that time how massive the resource is there. It covers about 75 square kilometers,
Okay.
if not more. So anyway, that topic sort of appealed to me. I worked with the engineering team at the University of Auckland doing core testing and things like that to assess why there had been at that time more than 10 meters of subsidence in one particular area of the field. And later, that subsidence bowl, as they're called, it expanded to being more than 30 meters of subsidence, which is a lot, and but very compressive formations, lots of pumice and pumice related rocks. Also, a sort of a leaky cap rock, which was a mudstone across the aquifer, the geothermal aquifer. So that was the topic of my studies. And I still continue to work on that topic today, not only in New Zealand, but in a few other countries. When this comes up, I know a little bit about the mechanisms that create the subsidence. And so, occasionally I get to work in that area too.
Okay. Okay. So you did your Fulbright. How many years of research was that?
It was a little bit over 2 years. I needed a
Okay.
little bit longer to finish my thesis, and I got a little extension of the scholarship, and it was great. And there were a series of Fulbrighters that had come through the University of Auckland. One of them was a friend of my future husband. So you know how connections happen in the world. It's just by chance, and you
I
meet
need that to
someone.
happen.
Yeah, love it.
Wonderful.
It's great
Yeah.
coincidence.
Okay. So then you left. Did you go back to the US after Auckland?
I did, and
Okay.
yep, and then we worked on his visa to come and
Okay.
marry an American human being, and that was all going on. But I looked around and I put my hat in the ring, and there had been a former Fulbright scholar, my colleague Roger Henneberger, who had decided to join GeothermEX, and I remember asking him a question. Well, was that a good place to work? And he said to me, he said, well, he's a serious kind of guy. He said, if the work is interesting, very interesting and varied, but if you need a fancy office, don't come here. That's what he told me.
Did
And
you need a fancy office?
I didn't need a fancy
Okay.
office. What I really want, I had learned the basics of geothermal through the master's degree program in New Zealand, but I wanted to be a practitioner of geothermal, not a researcher. So I just really wanted to learn more about geothermal and the craft of geothermal, if you will. And GeothermEX was the place I landed. I remember interviewing one of the four principals of GeothermEX at that time. And he interviewed me over the phone, and I guess phasing, he thought, Roger was a good fit for GeothermEX, and maybe I would be too. And there I stayed, all this
Okay.
time. And GeothermEX, now part of SLB, we still keep the name GeothermEX because it's well known around the world. And that company was actually started in 1973 when the first oil crisis happened.
So
And
what year did you join GeothermEX?
85,
85.
1985.
Okay.
Yep. And I never left. And why? Because the work is really interesting. He was
Yeah.
right. It was interesting, and you never knew what you were going to do. And you had to do things out of your field of expertise. And because we're consultants, what the
Yeah.
customer needs, we try to do. So
So
I learned a lot there. Yeah.
let's go back to those early years. Was GeothermEX, was it very small? How many people worked there when you started?
I think it was about maybe 10 people when I
Okay.
first worked there. And now we're up in the mid 20s.
Okay.
It's not a huge company, but we are part of a very huge company, obviously.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and we'll get into that, I'm sure, in a little bit here. But the company was only a few people because we never really knew if geothermal was going to take off or not. everyone was pretty conservative in terms of how much investment they would make in sort of new technologies and new products. But it was conservative, I think, in the right way. Not it wasn't like people were cheapskates. They were just very targeted in what kind of technology they wanted to
Right,
do, especially when we got into numerical simulation, which we first began to do on the Boeing Cray. So that tells you how ancient
right,
we are as a
right.
company. But it's been 51 years of GeothermEX. Two of the founders are still with us, I'm very
Okay.
glad to say, and they are amazed that we're going to have our holiday party soon, and they're going to come with
Wow.
us and talk about the old days and tell the newbies how it was and
Right.
what we are now. It's
Okay.
really great.
That's very, very exciting. I asked that because your GeothermEX name is everywhere. So on so stamp on so many projects. And I am just curious, like I can't even begin to imagine how many of the geothermal projects around the world that you actually worked
I
on.
don't know that I can count them anymore.
Yeah.
It's at least 1,000 projects, but some would be little tiny jobs, others
Yeah.
would be major jobs, like that lasted for years. But some of the really amazing projects that we did early on were for the Japanese government,
Okay.
helping them sort of start what was called the Sunshine Program for solar energy, but became more involved in geothermal. So we were very busy with them in the early days. And I remember one of my first jobs was for a company that still exists today, Idemitsu. This was a public, not a public company, but a private company doing geothermal. And so
Okay.
that I remember that job and a few others. A lot of things happening in Nevada in the early days of Nevada's
Yeah.
geothermal journey, with Ormat and others.
Yeah.
So I mean, there were just I don't know. It's like if I think about it, it's like um, a building of knowledge over those years, and just experiencing more and more, um, being allowed to fail occasionally.
Okay.
You don't always get the answer right.
Right.
But I mean, as a geologist, I did plenty of geology, but then I strayed into the other technologies that were within the capabilities of geothermals, which is um, geochemistry, geology, geophysics, obviously, and I was a geologist. I still am a geologist, and then we have reservoir engineers and drilling engineers. So, just trying to absorb as much as I could at the beginning of all those things, helped by a lot of friendly colleagues who, endured endless questions from me, as one does when one is young and not really knowing how it's going to go. But that that was how it was at the beginning, and then we gradually Roger did and I did sort of moved up into more management positions, but we're consultants, so we work on whatever, as I said, whatever people ask us to do that we can do. And so we had to be kind of cross training almost all the time, which I loved. And it really gave me the breadth of knowledge about geothermal subsurface domain mainly,
Right.
not so much power plant, um, but and mostly electricity. I'll just say that too, although we
Okay.
do some
Okay.
projects too.
So
So
then so in 2010, when GeothermEX transitioned into being acquired by
Schlumberger,
SLB,
yeah,
Schlumberger at
yeah,
that time,
yep.
um, I mean, were there benefits from now, did you have resources that you could pull from the greater Schlumberger
Oh,
to
absolutely. And
access oil and gas?
there are things we asked for too.
Okay.
But I'll just tell you at the very beginning, it was like we didn't really know. So there had been four partners who were the owners of the company. Gradually, each one retired. And when the last one retired, that was when the SLB, or formerly Schlumberger, acquisition happened. And we really didn't know what we were in for at all. Not long after that, if you remember 2000, late 14, 15, there was a big downturn in oil and gas. And everybody sort of, we'd had this experience before that when oil and gas is down, people sort of get interested in geothermal. But it never really stuck because oil and gas, it's so profitable and ubiquitous. It just is what it is. And we then sort of uh, just kept our heads down doing what we had been doing because the geothermal industry knew us. They didn't really know Schlumberger at that time. A little bit of well logging here and there, maybe. But the first thing that was talked about was changing our name. And I said, no, we're not changing our name. And why would we change our name when nobody knows Schlumberger and geothermal and everyone knows GeothermEX? And so we fought for that and we kept our name, and it still is in our name. It says Schlumberger's GeothermEX Consulting Services. We're still known as GeothermEX, which I think is an important thing because we do have a long legacy, 51 years so far, of working in literally hundreds of places. I think we're at about 74 different countries right now. And now they're getting more and more interesting as deep basin geothermal is coming around and other technologies are coming into the picture. It's just getting even more fun.
Okay. Okay, there's still so much that we need to
I
unpack
know.
here.
Keep going.
So I'm interested to hear. So, I'm assuming that you spent most of the career probably until 2017. Well, maybe you've done EGS, the next generation geothermal.
Oh,
I'm just going to assume it was a lot of conventional.
conventional geothermal has been the mainstay of GeothermEX's business, yes.
Okay.
But in
Sure.
1999, we
Okay.
were asked by what is euphemistically referred to as a Beltway bandit, a government consultant,
Okay.
to work on what was then called hot dry rock.
Okay.
And I said, well, we don't work on it. And they said, well, that's exactly why we want you, because the US Department of Energy was doing kind of a retrospective on Fenton Hill, which was, I'm pretty sure it's the first ever EGS. We called it hot dry rock in the day. And that was truly a hot dry rock project because it was really tight and difficult to fracture. But anyway, they wanted us to do a peer review of the technology that was developed at Fenton Hill. And so I jumped into that with both feet because I was very interested in, getting beyond already, 1999, getting beyond the typical conventional resources. So that led to a long relationship with what became what we and the Beltway Bandit renamed hot dry rock as enhanced geothermal systems. And that was the actual name. People like to say engineered geothermal systems, and that's fine too. I don't have any gripe about that. But enhanced was the word. And why did we choose that word? Because we wanted to show that there was a spectrum of everything from truly hot dry rock like Fenton Hill or like Newberry, for example. It's really tight, hard to get at rock.
Yeah.
And then, all the way across to a conventional geothermal system that has natural permeability that, just in the earth, naturally existing. So that, sort of kindled my interest in how we could, I was thinking then how we could really expand the geothermal domain if
Right.
we could crack that nut of fracturing this rock and making it work. And I'm so pleased to see what's happened today. I mean, it took a while,
Right.
let's just say, but
Right.
what's happening today um, with the advanced or what are called next generation technologies like EGS and AGS, the closed loop solutions. We have, I think, a very bright future ahead of us in geothermal energy. So I'm characteristically bullish on my own technology, geothermal, and but nevertheless, I do think the next gen resources are super important because we have a much bigger challenge than we ever thought of back when I started thinking about EGS.
Right. Okay, so it's my understanding that there were like 47 attempts at EGS before Fervo. I don't know if you
Oh,
know.
that's probably about right.
Were you
I haven't
involved?
counted them. Yes,
Okay, in
and
most of them.
not most of them. No,
Okay,
some of them. I would say really a few of them. I mean, a
okay,
lot of these projects were done by governments. The
okay.
Japanese were doing them, the Italians, who else? Yeah, maybe not really the New Zealanders, but a lot of countries were trying EGS, European countries particularly. Um, at that time, they're not so much into it now because they don't like the fracturing and the seismicity that comes
Yeah.
with fracturing. But
Here.
nevertheless, yeah, there's been a lot of projects that have been around. And now we worked on one in New Mexico first, then with Ormat in Desert Peak. Then we tried Brady's there, but there was definitely some kind of leak off that sort of prevented any great stimulation there in the place where we had access. Then there's been this Wells of Opportunity project that we're working on now, also with Ormat. We worked on an Alaskan EGS project. Um, and we're working with operators in the Rhine Valley of France and Germany, but not leading those projects. They generally are led by the Europeans if they proceed. So yeah, quite a number. The Wells of Opportunity is the one we're focusing on now, because we're trying to figure out how to stimulate three different wells in three different fields with different geology and different well completions. So wells of opportunity are existing ones. So anyway, that's one of the ones we're focusing on now. But EGS is a big passion for me. And Fervo, I'm so proud of them. I met with Tim Latimer at Stanford workshop 100 years ago. No, it was maybe 5 years ago. I don't know how many it was. And I thought this guy has a great idea, and I had done a research paper with a group called Pinnacle Technologies, which I think was later acquired by Halliburton.
Yeah, that's correct.
Um, yeah, and well, Chris Wright was part of that group, by the way, probably our new Secretary of Energy.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was just a non-starter. Well, it was a no-brainer, I would say, for me that EGS would become much more than it was when I was thinking back then in 99 and with
Right.
all these smallish projects funded by DOE. I think the real thing is ongoing today, and I'm
Okay.
very proud of them.
So I'm super interested to get your take. I mean, we've got all these different types of geothermal under the next generation geothermal umbrella. And so what I mean, you've got EGS, of course, that we've been talking about, advanced geothermal systems.
Mhm.
I've the term the hot sedimentary aquifers. So when you look at all
Yeah,
these
and then
different
there's super
types,
hot rock,
super hot rock,
the Clean Air Task Force, what Tara
yeah,
and her team are doing. There's other very sort of supercritical things going on, like
yeah,
quays and their millimeter wave drilling so they can get to supercritical conditions. All of these things will have their difficulties and their successes.
okay, okay,
And so I'm not gonna I love EGS because it seems to me to be um, the most obvious one to be successful on a large scale. That's my personal opinion.
okay,
Okay, that's nothing to do with the company I work for. I'm just saying
sure,
that I've
sure,
always been a big fan. And so AGS, I think, is a great idea. It's challenging from the financial perspective. Can it do power? This is a question. Are we just going to do heat? But to me, it doesn't matter. We just need every bit of geothermal technology we can get from, I will say, the lowly ground source heat pump, which is a technology that can be literally doing geothermal everywhere. This
right,
is the real geothermal everywhere, but it's not as visible, I think, as other technologies. So
sure,
so I would, I had a friend who was doing ground source heat pumps a long time ago. And he used to call what I did, which was mostly geothermal power, big G, big G. and he did little g. And I told him little g is going to win because little g can be deployed almost everywhere.
Do you
So
think little G is winning?
I do think it is
Yeah,
winning. It's a huge topic. I was just,
it is.
for whatever reason, I was reviewing some McKinsey reports today.
Yeah,
And there's so much that ground source heat pump technology can do, in tandem with other things. We know that there's community geothermal being done in the private sector and with public funding from US DOE.
right.
Obviously, in Europe, this is huge. District heating as well, not just ground source heat pump, but
Yeah,
sort of campus scale things. I love it. I'm a
right.
huge fan, even though it's not my business. I think
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah, my
great
mom,
technology.
she's got geothermal on her farm, and I guess all the community around, they all do geothermal. This is up in North Dakota.
Yes, very,
Yeah,
very good. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love working with Will Gosnold and the University of North Dakota. Occasionally,
yeah,
we do things together if it makes sense to do so. And yeah, North Dakota really has a great
yeah. Okay.
geothermal resource, and that
Yeah,
they're really starting to take advantage of now, which is
yeah,
fantastic.
it is. It's exciting. Okay, so, you know, geothermal there's been some, past, we're going to lift off, it's going to get there. And I think we're at a breaking point now. Do you think we're going to see significant movement in 2025 in the geothermal space?
I do. Well, I'm always bullish, as I said, on geothermal, but
Okay.
I think the liftoff report which came out in March this
Yeah.
year,
Mhm.
at CERAWeek. I think they announced it. Yeah. And I thought that report was excellent. It was really showing, and I mean, Secretary Granholm has been a huge fan of geothermal energy. And I think Chris Wright will be equally a huge fan. And I'm so glad to know that we do have bipartisan support for geothermal energy in the United States. This is a fantastic thing. But the overall view, I would say, is uh, we need every bit of technology we can get right now. The urgency of cleaning up our energy systems is critically important. I personally believe that we have a debt to our children, grandchildren, etc., to future generations, maybe put more simply, to do something. And it's hard to break old habits. And we've had a fantastic run with oil and gas for 120 years, right? But the time is nigh for doing things differently, and I'm totally excited to know that carbon capture and storage is gaining momentum at last, and this is so critically important for us. When we try to do synergies with other technologies like solar, like wind, I feel like geothermal can be a good friend, if you will, a good partner to other technologies. And this is something that I'm starting to work on more these
Okay.
days.
Well, I love to hear that. I kind of consider you to be at the forefront of geothermal, knowing about all the projects. So,
Well, we have had the good fortune to work on
yeah,
projects of all different kinds, and
yeah,
that's from very high enthalpy, crazy high enthalpy, to just barely making it on 120-degree fluid. It's
right.
Celsius, I mean. So it's been extraordinary journey for me as a human being, and for I think the people who like you and others believe in the value of geothermal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love this story. Okay, so I want to go back to the point that a lot of people, a lot of women say your name when they talk about mentors. And so you're highly regarded as a mentor to a lot of prominent women in geothermal. So, what insights and advice can you share about effectively mentoring others? I don't know if you're aware, I run the Thermal Trailblazer mentoring group for women in geothermal, which we've got amazing engagement. We've got more and more women joining. So your thoughts on mentorship, I'm listening to very carefully.
Okay.
So I'd love to
Okay.
hear what you have to say.
Well, first of all, first of all, I want to say that my tenure as the global chair of Wing was really amazing, eye-opening, important for me. I will admit to you that I I know I'm a woman, but I don't think of myself as that. I think of myself as someone doing geothermal energy. And and I grew up in New York. And if you know anything about New Yorkers, we don't take any crap from anybody. We just say what we think is right. And some, more nicely than others. But my mantra with respect to mentorship or almost anything else is just to be straightforward, say the thing that I think is important and true, and build on that. Um, what I would encourage anyone in the geothermal industry, man, woman, or in between, I would encourage them to be their true selves and be someone with integrity and someone who has a passion for something, someone who is willing to spend some time to sort out a thorny problem, whether it's related to a gender issue or a technical issue. It doesn't, to me, it's all kind of one. And I have tried to maintain a very high level of integrity in my own work. We do a lot of due diligence for project finance and GeothermEX. This means you have to be scrupulously honest, and you, when you say something, that it means that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the integrity with which we do, well, all of our work, but particularly due diligence, because it's so much is riding on it. To be truthful, to get stuck into the thorny issues, um, gleefully. Not, I mean, we don't want thorny issues, but if we have them, then we have to resolve them equally as well as we do the easy stuff. It's not easy to solve certain problems, and we've have many cases where we're sitting between the lender and the operator, and there's a problem, and our goal is just kind of to mesh it all back together in a logical way. Maybe it means slightly less capacity will be shown. Maybe the spreadsheet of ROI and all those financial matters doesn't look quite as attractive, but we know it's sustainable for the long term. So this kind of integrity is part of how I speak to anyone who's in geothermal, women, men. you know I don't know why, but I think it's because I'm willing to talk freely with people. I'm willing to express my opinions, even if I know they might not like them.
Okay.
So it's a honesty, integrity thing for me, and I'm so pleased to see many women coming into geothermal and knowing that they won't be discriminated against because of women in geothermal. And I have to give credit to our wingmen.
Yeah.
That we can't do this alone. We want gender equality in our membership as well as, in this geothermal sector. And I'm really proud of my participation in Wing. And I'm still on, we're
Yeah.
setting up a global Wing Foundation, as you probably know.
Oh,
And
I love that. No, I didn't
I'm
know that.
I'm
I'm
working
very
on that.
well, that's wonderful. So, I know about your involvement, but what years were you the most active in Wing?
I would say, while I was the global chair, I mean, I was active from about 2019
Okay.
until particularly towards the end of 2023, when Turkey took over as the global team.
Okay.
But I've continued to work with Andy Blair, who is one of probably the founder of Wing, to encourage um, a higher level of investment in this cause, which
Right.
is to be a model sector in terms of gender equality
Do
for
you
geothermal. But
you
we hope to be like a model for others too.
okay, so do you think the industry is investing enough in women in geothermal?
it's, how do I say it? There are companies who are very willing to invest in women in geothermal because they believe in doing the right thing as far as gender equity and equality. Um, we don't want to have any more experiences of harassment or things like that. And I do feel that the tide has really turned, not only for clean energy and geothermal specifically, but um, for recognizing that, we have a problem with gender issues
Yeah.
and that we need to fix them.
Right. No,
So
I mean, I will say, so my experience, I grew up in the oil field. I started with Schlumberger in 2008, and I started in the Middle East working in the field.
amazing.
So
Wow.
I've gone through very, very, rough, very rough conditions. But I've noticed the community in geothermal, it's very different than what
Yes,
I've
it is.
experienced throughout my career in
In
oil
oil
and
and
gas.
gas. Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
so welcoming. And I think maybe it's because there's a level of collaboration between everyone. Everyone's just trying to bring geothermal to the forefront, which makes it so easy to get involved in geothermal. It makes it so easy to learn. People want to teach and educate. So it's whereas oil and gas, I mean, it's like you have to prove yourself to folks to get them to teach you. Because when I started, it wasn't easy to learn, and I didn't have a background in um, petroleum engineering. It was chemical engineering. So I knew nothing about oil and gas when I first set foot in the Middle East. Um, but yeah, so
But
very
you
collab.
know that chemical engineers make the best reservoir engineers too.
Oh,
So you
hey, I
have
didn't know
you
that.
you
Wow,
have an angle.
there you go.
And
And
I know
then
you're doing great work at Valric, so I wouldn't
I
dare to
try to
try to tempt you away, but just in case.
Well, that's good to know. And then I also think there's just a humility. There is it's just different. It's a very welcoming community, which I think is very refreshing and exciting. And I just hope that feeling continues. And that's kind of the vibe of geothermal for more people who start to join and as it starts to grow.
Humility is a great aspect to have, I think, in a person. And I don't mean that we shouldn't be driven and trying for the best, but in geothermal, we don't have that magical 3D seismic to tell us exactly where we want to drill. So if you don't have humility about how you're targeting wells, then you're kind of in a different planet than I am on. I feel that, there's humility and there's hubris. And so I would much rather have humility than hubris. On the other hand, when we get our successes, and we've targeted a well and it's a gusher, obviously we feel really happy. But we don't have the direct knowledge that 3D seismic tends to give into the geothermal domain. It's more chaotic, it's more volcanic, it's regularly layered. But I will say that there's a big push for deep basin, hot sedimentary aquifer, call it that, or deep basin, either one. This is something we're working on a lot these days, and it's super important because it's engaging the oil and gas industry in a different way. And maybe with respect to gender issues, maybe they're seeing the value of a diverse workplace. I know in SLB, there's a huge push, and I think most oil and gas companies
Right,
probably have the same,
right.
to just recognize that, hey, let's just be grown-ups here
Right.
and not harass people for who they are or what they're like or what they wear on
Yeah,
their head or anything. It's really important. It's not only a gender issue, I think.
right. Okay. So I want to just, I've got a few more questions for you, but these are my most favorite. I love
Okay.
to hear about how these prominent women in geothermal like yourself, how you spend your time. What does a typical, I don't want to do a day. I want to do a week with you because I bet every
Okay,
day of a week is so different.
it
So what
is.
does the typical week look like?
Well, a typical week, as president of GeothermEX, there's a lot of things to do that, and I'll just digress for a moment. When GeothermEX was just a small privately held company, it was run in a totally different way than it's run now as part of SLB. And I would say there's, great improvements in sort of the rigor that we use being part of a much larger company with, a lot more at stake. And let's just be honest about that. But I will say that I continue to be involved in sort of honing what the scope of work is for certain projects, um, as well as signing contracts and NDAs and reading them and trying to put my legal hat on or get legal help from the experts in SLB, which they're great, actually. They're hugely important. Also, as the new energy division, which was started in 2020, February 2020, has evolved since then. I find that the geothermal energy group, which is part of the REE, it's renewable energy and energy storage sort of group, but all the geothermal technologies are under that, including Celsius Energy, which does campus scale ground source heat pump systems, including GeothermEX, including the drilling teams who work on drilling geothermal wells, including a very interesting energy storage play that we're working on. It's there's plenty of things to do, let me just say. And most days, I would say, I know you asked for a week, but most days I'm working till at least 7, maybe 8 p.m. Bad habit,
Bad
admittedly.
habit.
But I have this my typical days. I have early morning calls with Europe and UK, and then I have work I'm doing, and then I get interrupted by a need to assess something like a proposal or a NDA or a contract or whatever. So it's kind of a little mix of everything that I do like to do, and some things that are not my favorite thing to do, like you know dealing with contracts and stuff like that. But on the other hand, we do need to understand that the contractual issues that a geothermal company has is quite different from what an oil and gas company has. So we have been educating one another, I would say, in this, and it's really great to have the might of SLB um, at your fingertips if you need them. So I'm still deep into EGS, promoting EGS, but as I've had this role as the president of GeothermEX, it's been more than I would probably like of non-technical work. Because
Okay,
in my heart, I feel like I'm a geothermal practitioner and I want to practice geothermal.
I understand that.
Right.
Um,
Doesn't
okay,
really answer your question very well. I'm
no, it
sorry.
does, and it's you answered it perfectly. So if
And
you
then I'll tell you, my husband will text me and says, "Okay, what time are you coming home for dinner?"
Yeah,
And luckily, he loves to cook, so it's
okay,
all
great.
working out pretty well. But I don't want to take
So
advantage of it.
if you are working till 7, do you have
Yeah.
hobbies? Do you do things outside of geothermal?
I am really into music.
Really?
And I have been into music my whole life. My parents, I'm so old, I'll tell you that we used to call it hi-fi. When we had a real stereo set and my dad was totally nerdy about these things. He would build amplifiers, and that's what my husband does too. It's like really weird.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm really into music of all kinds. I love music, and I think music is a really underappreciated way of communicating with other human beings. But
Do you play
so
any instruments?
I sing in a band.
Wow.
We're a cover band, and we do the local bars and stuff
No
like that
way.
way. And I sing. I don't I played piano when I was much younger, but I left it too long ago.
Oh,
So
okay. Now we know what
basically
should
I'd
happen
sing.
at our next wing event.
Well, if you had been at the 2021,
Did you sing?
the wing event was, I insisted that we had a musical event, and I know some Icelanders, so it was in Iceland, right? It was in Reykjavik. And my good friend Atli, um, who I had met weirdly in Washington D.C. A long story, which I will not tell. I said, Atli, we're gonna come and we're gonna do a wing event and we're gonna play music. I said, I need a band.
This is
So
awesome.
so he plays guitar. He got the best band together, and we had such a party. And it was right before Omicron was really starting up. We had this magic window to do the World Geothermal Congress, and it was so well received because everybody had been kind of in lockdown and worried, and it was just like everybody cut loose, and it was great. It was a great event, promoting wing. It was just, we had to do, make people agree that they might get COVID and they can't play much more of
Yeah,
it and stuff like that.
I
But
love
it was
this.
it, it was a great event. So I'm sorry
Oh,
that you weren't
yeah.
there, because it was people just cutting loose and having such a good time. And it was the first night, it was on the Monday night. So we really kicked off the World Geothermal Congress
Well, I
with a
love
with a
this. Well,
blast.
maybe
Yeah.
there could be a second edition.
Why not?
Why
It's
not?
always, I mean, a lot of people are into music
Yeah,
and they play instruments and they do
yeah,
stuff.
I love
I
it.
I had actually thought of a battle of the bands, but then the COVID thing, we didn't know if it was going to happen, and so then I just said, let's make it simple and just do a musical event. And my friend
Why not?
Adley,
That's
who's a
very
lawyer,
creative. I
he
enjoy, I play musical instruments, so I
look
appreciate.
at you, 5 languages and or 5 degrees or something, and
Yeah.
you also do music.
Yeah, I grew up playing the trumpet and piano.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
I love the trumpet. My
Yeah.
dad played trumpet too.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one last question for you.
Okay,
What
I'm
advice
ready.
would you give to the younger generation looking to advance themselves in geothermal?
First of all, I would say that um, don't specialize too much.
Okay.
When you do geothermal energy, you have to be almost ready for anything.
Okay.
Um, Success and failure, obviously, but as I mean, nominally, I'm a geoscientist, but I have somehow osmosed or otherwise achieved some modicum of knowledge in the other disciplines, even including power plants and different, energy conversion technologies and stuff like this. So I would encourage them to take a big view of geothermal, because not that you're going to be working in all parts of it, but you do need some kind of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary information to practice the craft of geothermal energy. So that would be one thing. I mean,
Okay.
at the beginning, yeah, I focused on geology almost exclusively, but then it soon, someone was out or couldn't do this job or was sick, or, and so we just filled in to as much as we could and tried to make the best of it. I It's maybe a secret I shouldn't tell about GeothermEX, but the cross training aspect of it for me was absolutely critical. I am a person who cannot operate without a context. So context, I find, is the key to getting, okay, customer, you need this. And I can tell them you need that because of, I see the context in which they're operating. So that's a second thing. I would say, be broad in your thinking, talk to people, ask a zillion questions. That is what I did. That is what all the best consultants I've ever met do. They ask, I don't know, what's this thing? I need to know that. Help me out with this. As I said, I'm a New Yorker. I don't care. if I ask a stupid question. If I want to know something, I am going to ask it. And I would encourage every new person in geothermal to ask questions all the time, because that is how you learn. And you learn from the people who are old like me and others who have certain expertise. You know, this is the to me the best recipe for succeeding in the geothermal business: being flexible, asking questions, being curious, cross training, all of that.
it. Well, wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been a very insightful interview, and I didn't know any of this. I've been waiting for such a long time to have the opportunity to sit down and interview you. So thank you.
Well, it's kind of like the Colbert questionnaire. I guess I am more known now. If you, I don't know if you
Right.
watch Colbert, but
No.
he has the Colbert questionnaire, and famous people go and take the questionnaire, and then he feels they are now known.
Well, thank
So
you. Wonderful.